I was halfway through my last client meeting in Chicago when my phone buzzed on the table. I shouldn't have checked it. My client was mid-sentence about a $3 million kitchen renovation, but something pulled my eyes toward the screen. A voice message from my daughter's number. I tapped it, only half listening, and then I heard it. "Grandpa, please don't hurt Mommy." The air left my lungs so fast it felt like a punch. I didn't hear another word from the client. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't even pack up my laptop. I just stood, smiled as best I could, and walked straight out the glass doors. In the hallway, I replayed the message, pressing the phone to my ear like it might somehow give me more than just sound. The audio was garbled. There was a clatter, maybe dishes or a door, but the words were clear enough, and they shattered me. My daughter's voice hadn't sounded like that in years. In the cab ride back to my apartment, I thought about the last time we spoke. 2 nights ago. Her voice then was off, too perfect, like she'd memorized the words. "I'm fine, Mommy. I had cereal. I love you." Scripted, like someone was standing nearby. I told myself it was nothing. Now I knew better. I stared at the phone in my hand like it was a grenade. The kind that doesn't blow up buildings, just mothers. Dawn's baby shower was in full swing back in Chad's Ford. I saw it all on social media. The banners, the matching dresses, the hashtag blessed with Bryn. Our house, decked out like a Hallmark card. A sea of smiles that didn't include mine. Of course, I wasn't invited. That wasn't surprising. What got me was the video. My younger sister stood under a white arch of fake hydrangeas, passing out gift bags. The camera zoomed in as she handed each woman a pink envelope. "Strong Single Moms Club," the label read. Everyone laughed. Then Dawn added, too brightly, "At least I'm not that kind of single mom." Laughter again. The kind that's more dagger than joke. I closed the app. My fingers shook, but not from anger. From the slow-burning confirmation that I had officially been erased. No fights, no declarations. Just omitted. I sat in my apartment with the blinds drawn, thinking about Venora. About how she used to call me 3 times a day, just to tell me what color crayon she'd used. Now I barely got one sentence. She didn't sound afraid. She sounded numb, distant, rehearsed. I remembered the time she told me, "Nana says I talk too much on the phone." That was months ago. Since then, her calls had gotten shorter, duller. She was 6. Children don't go quiet on their own. Someone had dimmed her. Jackie Kennedy once said, "If you bungle raising your children, I don't think whatever else you do matters very much." I used to think I had time to fix what got broken between us. Now I wasn't sure I even had access. But that voicemail? That was my alarm bell. This wasn't about co-parenting or dignity anymore. It was about safety. Her safety. I wasn't going back for revenge. I was going back to protect her. Chad's Ford had always been a place where truth traveled slower than gossip. When I first left, exhausted, disoriented after postpartum, I was too ashamed to fight the narrative. She's unstable. She's overwhelmed. She left because she couldn't handle being a mom. The town never asked for proof. They just nodded and whispered. It didn't matter that I'd built a business before I turned 30, or that I never missed a parent-teacher meeting. One bad week was all it took to burn down a decade of devotion. In small towns, I once told my therapist, lies echo louder than screams. She thought it was poetic. I thought it was just Chad's Ford. My own father once told me, "You're too emotional to be a mother," as if being numb made better parents. Now I was going back, not as a daughter, not as a woman needing permission. And I was going back as Venora's mother. I didn't need a dramatic exit from Chicago. I needed a quiet re-entry into my child's life. But I also knew how my family worked. Optics mattered. So I called my assistant and told her to prep the jet. 2 seats, I said. Me and 1 more. I called Melanie, my lawyer from college, discreet, sharp, dangerous in heels. Then I called Jordan, a local journalist I trusted. He once did an expose on financial abuse in affluent families. This wasn't that far off. I'm not coming back to beg, I told them both. I'm coming back to take my daughter home. They didn't need more context. They just said, "We'll be there." And just like that, my quiet re-entry became a thunderous return. Standing on the tarmac, coat tight around me, I replayed the message again. This time, I didn't cry. I just listened. "Please, Grandpa, don't hurt her again." The voice was small, weary. A child who'd learned early not to scream, just to whisper. I closed my eyes. The engines behind me roared. And I stepped forward. I arrived back in Chad's Ford before sunrise, the town still dressed in shadows and silence. No one knew I was here, and I planned to keep it that way for now. My lawyer, Melanie, stayed behind in Chicago to handle the filings. I needed to lay eyes on my daughter first before anything else. Driving past the old church on Main Street, I caught sight of a sagging banner still tied to the gate. "Welcome, baby Bryn." Same pastel font, same artificial cheer. The same space they used for Dawn's baby shower just days ago. I pulled over. The engine ticked in the silence. That banner. It hung like a parade float for a parade I was never invited to. "They built a celebration out of the bricks they threw at me," I whispered, gripping the steering wheel. The sunrise painted everything gold, but it felt like rust. Pretty on the outside, but I could smell the decay underneath. I didn't go to the house. Not yet. I needed to see Venora. Needed to confirm with my own eyes what my gut already knew. I parked near the elementary school around 2:40 p.m., tucking my car behind a row of minivans. The dismissal bell rang at 3 o'clock sharp. Parents lined up by the fence, chatting casually, waving at teachers they'd seen for years. I sat quietly, sunglasses low, hoodie up. No one noticed. I was invisible again, same as I'd been for 2 years. Then I saw her. Venora came out holding Dawn's hand, not Elaine's, not my mother's, my sister. My little girl was wearing a lavender hoodie and carrying a crumpled art folder. Her steps were stiff, like she was walking through wet cement. Dawn bent to her, adjusting something on her sleeve. Venora looked up and smiled. But her smile didn't reach her eyes. It was a practiced expression, something worn like a school uniform. "Can we go to the art store, Auntie?" she asked, just loud enough for the teacher on duty to hear. My fingers clenched on the steering wheel. I didn't blink. I couldn't. They got into Dawn's car. She drove off like any doting aunt would. Once the parking lot cleared, I stepped out and walked toward the teacher who'd been on duty, Miss Gilman. She looked up, startled. I didn't know you were here," she said, her voice hushed. "I mean, are you allowed to be?" I gave a polite smile and handed her my card. "You don't have to say anything. I know it's complicated," I said, keeping my tone even. "But if anything ever feels off, please, call me." She hesitated, then slipped the card into her coat pocket. She's a quiet girl, very polite, but she draws a lot, more than most. That was enough. I nodded once and turned back to my car. By 9:30 that night, I had checked into a quiet Airbnb on the outskirts of town. A small brick cottage with creaky floors and an even creakier front door. At 10:37 p.m., my phone pinged. Subject: "You asked me to say something." The sender: Ms. Gilman. I opened the email slowly, heart thudding like a metronome in my chest. "She never talks about you," it began. "Not in anger, not in sadness, just nothing. Like you were a dream she's been told to forget." I read every line like a diagnosis. She draws a woman often, always behind a fence or a window. Sometimes holding a key, sometimes not. She colors her gray. And then, the line that cracked something inside me. She once asked me, very softly, "Can monsters live inside families?" I didn't realize I was crying until the screen blurred. "I don't know what's going on," Ms. Gilman wrote, "but I believe children paint what they cannot say." I dropped the phone on the bed and buried my face in my hands. If silence could bruise, my daughter would be covered in scars. I couldn't sleep. So I drove. Past midnight, I pulled up near the edge of our family's old house. I parked where the trees gave me partial cover, but still a view into the kitchen window. Lights were still on. The fridge was covered in children's drawings. I squinted to see. One image, larger than the rest, caught my eye. A child, holding hands with two adults, Dawn and Reet, a dog at their feet. No mother. My stomach turned. Moments later, Venora appeared in the kitchen, showing Dawn something in her sketchbook. Dawn smiled. Her lips moved. She touched Venora's shoulder, nodded encouragingly. And then I saw it. Her eyes. That smile didn't match them. That was the same smile my mother wore the day she told me to pack my things and take some space. It wasn't love. It was management. Control wrapped in pleasantries. I whispered into the dark windshield. They're not just keeping her. They're rewriting her. I leaned back in the seat, eyes burning. A memory surfaced. Faint but sharp. 2 years ago, Venora had just finished her kindergarten recital. She ran into my arms, sweaty and breathless from her performance. She hugged me so tightly I couldn't breathe. "Don't ever let me go," she whispered. I didn't know then that it would be the last time I'd hold her like that. Days later, under pressure, overwhelmed, manipulated, I'd signed the temporary guardianship paper. A break, they called it, not a theft. But it was. They didn't just take her from my arms, they took me out of her mind. Maya Angelou's words surfaced like a tide. There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. My agony had a name. And she no longer called me Mom. I was still sitting there when someone knocked on my window. I jumped, heart hammering. It was Barbara, the old housekeeper. She leaned down slowly, her face creased and pale. "I can't watch this anymore," she said. Barbara didn't speak at first. She just stood there, her hand resting on the edge of my open car window, eyes scanning my face like she was checking for fractures. She looked thinner than I remembered, fragile, worn, like someone who had been carrying too many secrets for too long. "I can't watch this anymore," she repeated, then opened the passenger door and slid in slowly. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched the folded cloth bag in her lap. For a moment, she didn't meet my eyes. "They mailed something last week," she said finally. "Had your name on it, a new revision of the guardianship paperwork, but the signature was copied, exactly copied." I blinked, trying to piece her words into something solid. "You're saying, someone forged my name again?" Barbara nodded once. "They've done it before. That first paper, the one they made you sign after the baby, it was never meant to be temporary. It was always going to be permanent. They just needed you too tired to question it." My stomach tightened. "You were there?" She looked at me, ashamed. "Yes. I made the tea. I watched you sign it. I heard Elaine say, 'Let her rest. She won't remember the fine print anyway.'" She hesitated, then reached into her bag and pulled out a small flash drive. I didn't know if I'd ever have the courage, but this has a copy of what they filed. And a recording I made. I wasn't sure it would matter. I guess I hoped I was wrong. I took the flash drive from her with shaking hands. "Thank you," I whispered. "Don't thank me," she said, voice low. "Just don't let them do it again." Back at the Airbnb, I opened my laptop and plugged in the drive. The folder was neatly labeled Venora Custody Filing. The PDF opened slowly. The document was 17 pages long. My eyes landed on page 7. There it was. My signature, perfect, slanted the same way, same spacing, same underline flourish. Except, I'd never signed this. Not with clarity, not with full awareness. The date on the document, 2 days after Venora was born. I was still in the hospital then. Another file blinked to life. A voice recording. I hit play. Elaine's voice crackled through the speakers. "If she asks later, just say it was temporary. Say she needed the rest. She won't remember. New mothers don't." My lungs constricted. They planned it. They waited for my lowest point, then used it to bury me. I copied everything to my own cloud folder and emailed it straight to Melanie with the subject. "Use this. Make it count." As the file sent, I stared out the window. moonlight catching the frost on the edges. My mind echoed with a single sentence. They built a cage with my pain and handed me the key, knowing I wouldn't recognize it. Morning came too quickly. I found myself walking, needing air, needing to move. The path behind the old bridge by the creek was still the same, stones uneven, the railing warped with time. I used to ride my bike here as a kid, scream into the trees like no one was listening. Maybe no one ever was. Now I whispered to the wind. They didn't help me heal. They dismantled me piece by piece, then called it concern. People say time heals, but that's only true if time is allowed to be honest. If the wound keeps being reopened by lies, all time does is rot. I sat on the edge of the bridge, watching water swirl below. If I signed that under duress, I murmured, then they knew. They knew that if I were whole, I'd fight. So they made sure I never was. Later that afternoon, I met Melanie at a small cafe tucked behind the courthouse. She looked up from her laptop as I walked in, motioned for me to sit. I read everything, she said, skipping the small talk. That signature, legally binding, but not airtight. I frowned. What do you mean? Melanie turned her screen toward me. There's no legal advisement on record, no third-party witness, no mental health clearance, and the file was submitted during a period when you were under postnatal care. That timing opens a door. I leaned in. How wide? Wide enough to walk through with a good argument and a determined mother. She sat back. Step 1. We challenge the document. File for reevaluation based on coercion and capacity. Step 2. We bring in your therapist, Kelly, to affirm your mental state post-discharge. I didn't hesitate. Do it. She held up a hand. Before we proceed, this is going to get ugly. They're not going to admit fault. They'll come at you harder now, smarter, meaner. I met her eyes. I've sat quietly long enough. Melanie nodded once, pulled out her phone and started dialing. By dusk, I was driving back toward the estate. Not to confront, not to argue. I just needed to see, to feel the soil of the battlefield before stepping onto it. The house was lit up as usual, kitchen windows glowing gold. Familiar shadows dancing behind the curtains. I pulled over at the end of the drive, engine idling. Elaine stood in the kitchen, stirring something at the stove. She smiled as Dawn walked in behind her. It was casual, effortless. A woman running a home. A mother, they'd say. The image was seamless, except I knew what was behind it. She thinks the war is over, I whispered. Because I've been silent. But silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. Honeychurch stirred her coffee slowly, her eyes never leaving mine. The diner we sat in was nearly empty, just 2 women in the corner booth, both dressed for battle, but only one wearing it on her face. They're not going to just let this go, Tatiana, she said plainly, sliding a manila folder across the table. You humiliated them by stepping back in. Now they're preparing to call you unstable, publicly and legally. I opened the folder. Inside were clippings, printouts, and typed statements. One from a local reporter quoting a source close to the Dykes family, describing me as erratic, emotionally volatile, and a danger to myself and my child. Another was a scanned medical form from my postpartum months, highlighted in red. Hallucinations, emotional detachment, increased paranoia. This wasn't leaked by accident, Honeychurch continued. Elaine and Reed are feeding this to the media. They want to preempt whatever you're building. They're not fighting me, I said. They're fighting reality. Again, she sipped her drink, calm as ever. You can't gaslight someone who already left the building, but you can try to discredit them before they re-enter. I folded the folder shut. Let them try. The church hall hadn't changed. Still smelled faintly of old pews and sugar cookies. Balloons framed the door in gold and navy, celebrating 100 years of the Dykes' legacy. I wasn't invited, but the event was open door, and no one stopped me when I walked in. Inside, photos lined the walls. Generations of smiling faces in matching outfits. A printed family tree stretched across a mounted board. I stepped closer. My name wasn't on it. Neither was Venora's. I stared at the tree for a moment, and then I found it, my spot, an empty space between Elaine's side and the youngest branch where Dawn's name now sat alone. A small plaque read, "The heart of the family grows forward." I wanted to laugh, but instead I counted 12 times Dawn was mentioned in the pamphlet. 0 for me. The display screens flicked through family highlights, birthday videos, weddings, baby showers. Every child and grandchild, everyone but my daughter. I turned to Reet, who stood near the punch table, chewing on a toothpick like he hadn't a care in the world. "You excluded her, on purpose," I said quietly. He didn't flinch. "We just didn't think you'd be interested." "No," I said, louder now. "You didn't think we mattered." He shrugged. "This is about legacy, not grudges." Dawn took the stage then, microphone in hand, smile gleaming. "This family has endured storms, heartbreaks, even loss," she said. "But we're still standing, and what keeps us strong is unity, shared values, honesty." I didn't cry, I just counted the lies. That night, my phone vibrated just past midnight. It was a message from Honeychurch. The subject line read, "Found something." She had received a leak from someone at the clinic, an anonymous tip containing a file that Elaine had submitted to reinforce my instability claim, a copy of a psychiatric evaluation from the months after Venora was born. I clicked it open. Page 1. My name, my birth date, a summary diagnosis. The words jumped out in bold. Hallucinations, emotional instability, episodes of confusion. The same form Dawn had waved at me once, saying it was nothing. But it was missing the context. No notes from my therapist, no mention that it was temporary, tied to sleep deprivation and blood loss post-delivery, no record of my improving state within 2 weeks. They'd cherry-picked my weakest moment and preserved it in ink. I stared at the screen, pulse pounding. They had been collecting reasons to destroy me long before I ever left. What kind of mother takes her daughter's mother and calls it love? I walked for hours after that, down roads I hadn't seen in years. The wind was colder than I remembered, or maybe I was just more aware of it now. Behind the church, where the land sloped into the woods, I stopped and leaned against a tree. And I broke. My knees buckled. I vomited into the dirt. And then I sat there and sobbed, angry, hollow sobs that didn't ask for comfort. "They built this house on shame," I whispered, "and I carried every brick for them." My mind reeled with a memory, Elaine standing over me after Venora was born, me too exhausted to speak, her hand on my shoulder. "Your emotions are your enemy," she'd said, and I'd believed her. But now, under the stars and the weight of betrayal, I whispered back into the dark. "No, yours were." At dawn, I called Miss Kelly. "I need you," I said, no pleasantries. "I need you to write an affidavit. You treated me. You know I wasn't unstable. I was recovering." She didn't hesitate. "Of course," she replied. "You weren't incapable. You were just unprotected." Her words landed harder than intended, because they were true. Before we hung up, I said something I hadn't said out loud since this all began. "I'm not reclaiming my daughter," I told her. There was a pause. "I'm reclaiming my reality." My phone buzzed again at breakfast. I assumed it thought about the long nights I spent building that brand while pregnant. I'd pitched investors at 8 months along. I closed my biggest contract while holding a swollen belly and a protein bar. And while I was bleeding in a hospital bed, they were filing documents to take it all. "They didn't just take my child," I whispered. "They took my future while I was recovering." Later that evening, we sat in her office with a forensic document analyst. He was precise, older, and looked like he'd been doing this since carbon paper days. "The file's fingerprint pattern is too smooth," he explained, enlarging my signature on the screen. "See here? The same exact slant, spacing, pixel bleed. It's a copy-paste job from a different form. Can you prove it?" I asked. He nodded. "Not only can I prove it, but I can timestamp the manipulation. Whoever did this used an open-source editor. Amateurs." Melanie smirked. "Good, let's start building fraud charges." She flipped through more documents and pointed to one in particular, This one shows Dawn as the acting financial officer of your original trust. Reet and Elaine signed as advisors. The language is careful, but the intention is clear. I pressed my fingers into my temples. I left behind spreadsheets. They rewrote them into my eulogy. No, she said firmly. They rewrote them into their inheritance. But we're taking the pen back. Barbara called me the next day from a number I didn't recognize. Can we meet? Somewhere quiet? I chose the laundromat 2 blocks from the train station. She arrived with her coat pulled tight and a canvas bag hanging from her shoulder. She looked around like she expected to be followed. I didn't want to bring this to the house, she said, pulling out a small USB drive and handing it to me. It fell out of a stuffed bear when I was folding Venora's sheets. I didn't know it was there, I swear. I blinked. A flash drive? In her bear? Check it. Back at the Airbnb, I plugged it in. My laptop hesitated, then loaded a folder labeled Anti-Time. Inside were short video clips, all time-stamped. Footage from a camera hidden inside the teddy bear, angled toward Venora's bed, her play area, her desk. I clicked one. The grainy video showed Venora drawing in silence. Dawn entered the room. You're not her child anymore, Dawn snapped. You're mine now. Got it? The girl didn't speak. She just nodded, stiffly, eyes wide. Another clip. Elaine walking in, glancing at the bear, then walking right back out. She saw it, and left it. My hand froze on the mouse. This wasn't just control. It was conditioning. I sat in the quiet for hours after watching those clips, the screen dark, the air heavy. And then, I pulled out the bear. It was still there. In the bottom of my suitcase. I had packed it without thinking, without knowing it had been used against her. I remembered buying it, one of those soothing sensory bears meant to calm babies through texture and warmth. I remembered Venora clutching it during feedings, drooling on it during naps. It used to protect her. Now it spied on her. And I cried, not from pain, from clarity. This isn't paranoia, I said out loud. This is planned. That night, Honeychurch and I sat in her office with the lights low, the windows covered, the air thick with resolve. We filed 2 things, she said. Emergency custody petition and a motion to freeze every asset connected to the stolen business. On what grounds? I asked, though I already knew. She answered without looking up. Fraud, coercion, identity theft, mental health exploitation. Pick one, or all. I leaned forward. They used my maternity leave as a transfer window. She smiled. Then let's slam that window shut. I signed the paperwork. We scheduled a court date, 9 days out. This time, I would be the one in control of the story. Before shutting down for the night, I checked the files on the bear one last time. There was one clip I hadn't played, dated just last week. I clicked it. Venora sat alone, the bear on her lap. She whispered into its stitched ear, "Mommy, are you still coming?" I froze. That wasn't a question. That was a plea. The buzz jolted me out of a half-sleep. I squinted at the glowing screen, 2:03 a.m., and for a split second, I almost let it ring out. Then I saw the number. Unknown, local. My stomach dropped. Hello? It was Barbara. Her voice tight and whispering like she was hiding in a closet. I can't take it anymore. They're hurting her. I sat up. Barbara, what? She's in the storage room, she rushed out. Elaine locked her out, said she was being disrespectful. I found her crying on a pile of blankets, wouldn't say a word. I threw on jeans while she spoke. Is she okay? She kept asking for you. Then, she stopped asking. That's what scares me. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. She knew what that silence meant. The worst thing wasn't that they'd hurt Venora. It was that they'd convinced her to stop reaching out. I stared at the wall in front of me, my hands numb. I left for peace. They made it into exile. I couldn't go back to sleep. I didn't even try. The sun wasn't up yet, but I was already driving toward the estate. The roads were empty, the air dense with dew. I parked across from the house, waiting behind a landscaping van until I saw the last helper leave around 6 a.m. The storage shed sat at the edge of the property, half hidden by overgrown shrubs. I walked to it slowly, heart pounding louder than my footsteps. The door creaked when I touched it. Through a crack, Light from the sunrise hit the corner of the room, and I saw it. A child's blanket. A juice bottle, empty and dented. A stuffed bear, worn and bent at the ears. Venora's second favorite, the one she never named but always slept with when she didn't want anyone to notice. I opened the door all the way and stepped inside. The air smelled of dust and old paint. I knelt beside the blanket, ran my hand over the dirt, and saw it. Her name, scratched faintly into the wooden wall with what looked like a crayon. Venora. They made her sleep here. Alone. They let her believe she wasn't wanted, I whispered, choking on my breath, just so I'd never be missed. Later that day, Barbara and I met in my car behind the church, where the trees shaded us from view. She looked at me with glassy eyes and pulled out her phone. I recorded something, she said, voice barely above a breath. She tapped play. Venora's voice came through, quiet and uncertain. If she's really my mom, why did she leave me? I didn't breathe. My chest locked. That small voice cracked through my ribs and lodged in a place I didn't know existed. Barbara reached to pause it, but I stopped her. I needed to hear it again. It wasn't just the question, it was how she said it, not with anger, not with hope, with conclusion. She'd decided I wasn't coming back. It's not what she said, I said aloud. It's that she asked it like a fact. My eyes stung. I didn't leave you, baby. I just wasn't strong enough then. But that was then. Just before dusk, I drove out to the lake where I used to take Venora when she was a toddler. She'd always toss pebbles and ask why the water never got tired of moving. I never had an answer. I sat on the old bench, pulled out a photo album I'd salvaged before I left. Picture after picture of her growing up there. When the man who erased you asks for a conversation, it's never about redemption. Reet stood beside my car like a man waiting for a delivery. His posture was polite, his tone was level, but the air between us was thick with history, and none of it warm. We should sit down, he said, eyes flicking toward the street. Talk, face to face, no press, just family. I stayed silent for a beat, then, only if my lawyer comes. He nodded once, almost like he expected it. Bring whoever makes you feel less outnumbered. That told me everything I needed to know. They'd set the table for 6. The estate's formal dining room was immaculate. Centerpiece candles, polished silver, chairs placed like soldiers around the mahogany table. Dawn greeted us at the door with a smile that felt laminated. Elaine appeared seconds later, wiping her hands on a linen towel like she'd just stepped out of a casserole ad. Tatiana, she said evenly, so glad you could join. I didn't bother returning the sentiment. Melanie stepped in beside me, professional and unreadable. I'm here as counsel, she said firmly, and an observer. Dawn let us in like a hostess at a country club. The room smelled like rosemary and butter. Comfort, manufactured. During the first 10 minutes, no one addressed the elephant in the room or the lion seated beside me. Then Dawn reached into her purse and slid a phone across the table. Look what Venora sends me every day. The screen lit up. I love it here. Thank you, Auntie, for rescuing me. I'm so happy now. I stared at the texts, the font, the punctuation, the grammar, and I knew instantly. She didn't write these, I said calmly. Dawn blinked. Excuse me? She's 6, I continued. She doesn't use punctuation like that. She doesn't say rescuing, and she certainly wouldn't call this place home. Elaine scoffed lightly, reaching for her wine. Children adapt. Melanie leaned forward. Do you have a record of the number these messages came from? They're from Venora's iPad, Dawn said quickly. No, I corrected. They're from your hand. No one answered, but the silence said more than they could. That night, back in the Airbnb, I forwarded the screenshots to Jacob, an old friend in cybersecurity. He ran a boutique firm out of Chicago. I didn't need him to testify, yet. I just needed confirmation. It didn't take long. These weren't sent from the child's iPad, he told me on the call. They originated from Elaine's. He sent over the metadata, timestamps, IP addresses, internal contact info. Also, he added, The contact name listed for you on her account. It was changed to Other Mommy, then later to just T. I stared at the data, letting the weight of it settle. This isn't parenting, I muttered. This is impersonation. Jacob whistled low. This is sick. I drafted a cease and desist notice that night. Melanie looked it over via video chat. Clean, she said. We'll send this to the judge tomorrow. And attach it to the custody motion. They won't stop, I said. They've been erasing me since the moment I left. Then stop giving them permission. By morning, the rage had settled into something colder, heavier, like concrete. They're not just trying to erase me from her present, I said to Melanie over coffee. They're rewriting her memory. You're not wrong. They don't want to win. They want to replace me. She nodded slowly. Eleanor Roosevelt once said, "No one can make you feel inferior without your consent." But Tatiana, this isn't about inferiority. This is about theft and trauma. I clenched my jaw. So we fight? Melanie didn't flinch. No, we protect. And that looks a lot like fighting. That afternoon, we filed the motion. Emergency hearing, request to review custodial manipulation, digital identity abuse, and emotional endangerment. The court clerk barely looked up as we handed over the stack. Expected something like this, she muttered. You're not the first mother they've tried to edit out. Melanie raised an eyebrow. Excuse me? The clerk shrugged. Reed's sister went through something similar 20 years ago, left town with nothing. No one talks about it now. I said nothing, but inside, something clicked. This wasn't just a family problem. This was a legacy. Melanie laid out the filing schedule on the car hood as we left. Hearing in 6 days, she said. Get ready. They'll come hard. They always do, I said. She handed me a pen. Sign here. Officially draws the line. I signed. Firm. No hesitation. This isn't just my fight anymore, I said. It's her future at stake. That night, I was sitting on the couch, legs tucked under me, reviewing court prep notes, when my phone pinged. New message, from Venora's number. I opened it. Don't forget to delete yesterday's messages. She'll know. I stared at the screen. It wasn't meant for me. It was meant for Dawn. Tatiana breathes out. Thank you for slipping. It's your turn now. The parking lot was packed. Cars lined the edges of the lawn, volunteers in matching navy shirts directing traffic with forced smiles and clipboards. Balloons bobbed at the entrance to the Chad's Ford Community Hall. I tightened my coat and stepped out of the car. No one greeted me. The banner above the doors read, 100 Years of Dyke's Family Legacy. Gold letters, ornate font, polished like they'd been planning this for months. I hadn't received an invitation. I found out from a neighbor who assumed I was attending, then hesitated and muttered, Wait, weren't you in Chicago? They built a legacy and carved me out of it like I was the cancer. Inside, the hall gleamed with money and image, chandeliers, custom-printed family trees, rows of framed photos mounted along the walls, faces I knew, people I grew up with, smiling at strangers like we were one big healthy unit. I walked slowly, each step heavier than the last. My name was gone, not misspelled, not misplaced, gone. A blank gap between my sister's branch and the cousins below. One photo caught my eye, me at 11, standing with Reed at a picnic. My nameplate had been covered with a navy ribbon. At the dinner table, a place card read, Guest from Chicago. During the slideshow, Venora was absent. They'd included everyone else, kids I hadn't seen since they were in diapers, photos of birthday parties, school plays, but not my daughter. My hands curled into fists beneath the tablecloth. Legacy, I thought bitterly, is just selective memory written by the most manipulative survivors. When the lights came back on, applause rippled through the room. Dawn walked to the stage, her steps measured, her face lit like a politician on her final campaign rally. She tapped the mic. Thank you all for being part of this momentous evening. Our family has weathered so much, pain, change, unexpected detours, but we're here, stronger, together. I stood. Not loud, not dramatic, just firm. She paused mid-sentence. Everyone turned. I walked up the small stairs to the stage and gently took the mic from her hand. Before you talk about family, I said, voice steady, let's make sure we all see it clearly. I turned to the projector tech and handed him a flash drive. Play this, please. He hesitated, glancing toward Dawn. She nodded, trying to smile, but her eyes had begun to twitch. The video flickered on, fuzzy at first, then clearer. Dawn's voice filled the room. You're not her kid. You're mine now. You don't need her. Venora sat curled in the corner, hugging a pillow, eyes wide, silent. Elaine walked into frame, looked, turned away. Gasps. Someone spilled a glass. The clink of a fork hitting the floor. Elaine froze mid-blink. Reet dropped his napkin and didn't bother picking it up. Dawn lunged for the mic. That's out of context. I held it just out of reach. Calm. You can't mute the truth just because it's inconvenient. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just let the silence do the damage. The room broke into murmurs and whispers. Aunts turned away. Uncles whispered to their wives. The air shifted. Some relatives stood. Others walked out. A few glared at Elaine and Dawn before storming off. I stepped down from the stage, feeling 20 pounds lighter, as if I'd been carrying the weight of someone else's narrative and finally set it down. Near the back, a reporter from the Delaware Times tapped my shoulder. Tatiana, care to comment? I looked at her camera, then into her eyes. I didn't come to make a scene, I said. I came to reclaim my daughter's story. She nodded, lips tight. The journalist beside her murmured, That'll run tomorrow's front page. I didn't care. I hadn't come for headlines. I came for the truth. And to make sure they couldn't lie unchecked again. Backstage, Elaine waited. She grabbed my arm with a grip stronger than I expected. You're unstable, she hissed. Ungrateful. And now, uninvited, permanently. Is that your legal stance or just a tantrum? I said calmly. Her face flushed. You will regret this. I'll sue for defamation, emotional harm. That was a private recording. You harmed her, I said. Not just me. Her. You're nothing, Tatiana. You've always needed someone to clean up after you. I turned slightly. I cleaned up enough of your mess growing up. I'm done now. Melanie stepped beside me, silent until she pulled an envelope from her bag. This is for you, she said, handing it to Elaine. Elaine snatched it. Inside, a court summons, list of evidence. Elaine's hand trembled as she read. Melanie gave her a small, razor-sharp smile. You'll want to read that closely. Page 3's where it gets personal. Elaine didn't speak. She just crumpled the envelope and turned away. As we walked toward the exit, I heard something. A whisper. Soft. Small. I stopped. Behind the curtain near the hallway, a figure peeked out. Venora. She looked smaller than I remembered, but her eyes were clear. She stepped out. You came for me, she whispered. I knelt. My hands trembled as I reached for her. I never stopped, I said. And in that moment, for the first time, I didn't feel like a stranger to my own child. I woke up before the alarm. No dreams, no tossing, just stillness. I splashed cold water on my face and stared into the mirror above the sink. The person looking back at me was not the woman who left this town years ago, broken and tired. I pulled my hair back, slipped into the navy suit, clean lines, no frills, no makeup, no jewelry, nothing to distract or invite pity. Inside my coat pocket, I tucked the folded drawing, Venora's, the one with the woman behind the fence bag on the table. Elaine shot up. This is being dramatized for effect. The judge held up a hand. You'll have your turn, Mrs. Dykes. Sit down. Honeychurch didn't blink. We are not presenting this to accuse a specific individual. We are presenting this to ask, who in this room should be allowed to raise this child? A hush swept over the gallery. Fingers clacked against keyboards. Even the bailiff leaned in. I kept my eyes on the shirt, that tiny collar, that familiar fabric. The judge asked, was this stain tested? Yes, Your Honor, Honeychurch replied. Preliminary confirms human blood. Child's type. Further results pending. The judge nodded once. Continue. Next, the screen lit up with a face. Ms. Kelly, my therapist. Calm, unshaken, streaming in via Zoom. Ms. Kelly, the judge began, you treated Ms. Dykes postpartum, correct? Yes, she answered. For a period of 9 months, weekly. What was her diagnosis? Acute postpartum depression, not psychosis, not delusional episodes, and not long-term incapacity. Was she ever a danger to her child? Never, Kelly said firmly. She was overwhelmed, lacked support. But she was always focused on her daughter. The judge leaned forward. Can you speak to her capacity as a mother today? Kelly looked straight at the camera. If trauma is a disqualifier for motherhood, then we'd all be orphans. Honeychurch glanced at me, a small nod of acknowledgement. I let one tear fall, just one. The judge turned to me. Ms. Dykes, you may speak. I stood, no notes, no trembling. I'm not here to punish anyone, I began, but I need to correct something. I looked at Elaine, at Dawn, at the rows of strangers. They said I walked away. I didn't. I was pushed, with a pen in one hand and silence in the other. Someone shifted in the gallery. They told me I needed rest. What I needed was protection. I pulled the drawing from my coat. This is what my daughter sees, a mother behind a fence. She doesn't draw monsters. She draws barriers. I laid the paper flat on the table. She's learning to forget me. Not because I left, but because someone taught her to. Silence. This hearing isn't about revenge, it's about return. I want to return to her, as her mother, not a memory. The judge's eyes didn't leave mine. She didn't speak, just gave one small nod, and banged the gavel. Court adjourned until tomorrow morning for ruling. As I stepped outside, the air felt heavier than when I entered. Not because of fear, because of release. I reached into my coat again. The drawing was still there. But something had changed. The fence? Open. Just a little. A crack wide enough for hope. Maybe she still remembers. Maybe she still hopes. The morning after court, the air inside Honeychurch's office felt heavier than the late October sky outside. We sat side by side at her conference table, papers stacked neatly in front of us, neither of us speaking. Judgment was set for 3:00 p.m. Until then, we reviewed everything. I traced my finger along the edge of Venora's drawing again. The new version, the one with the open gate. Hope drawn in crayon. A door cracked just enough to let me in. Sometimes, I whispered, justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it knocks softly. As if on cue, there was a knock at the door. Honeychurch rose and opened it. A court clerk handed her an envelope. No sender, just to be opened by the recipient only. Inside, a copy of a psychological evaluation. With my name on it, it wasn't my handwriting. We laid the document next to my actual medical file. Line by line, we compared. This language is way too clinical, Honeychurch muttered. Tatiana, you never use words like intermittent derealization. She pointed to the therapist's name. They spelled Kelly's name wrong, 1 E instead of 2, and the signature is a scan. Look, the edge is pixelated. I stared at it. They forged a psych eval in my name. This wasn't just malicious, Honeychurch said. It was planned. It's layered. We called Ms. Kelly. I never wrote that report, she said immediately. I've never seen it, and I absolutely didn't submit it to the court. My hand tightened on the edge of the desk. Can you state that in writing? I'll send the affidavit within the hour. I hung up and looked at Honeychurch. They didn't just attack my fitness as a mother. They fabricated a mental illness. She nodded. And now they've handed us their weapon. By noon, we'd filed an emergency motion for fraudulent submission of psychological evidence. The judge called an unscheduled session. Honeychurch stood before the court, voice sharp and calm. This is no longer just a custody hearing, she began. This is a coordinated effort to destroy a woman's reputation, legal standing, and parental rights using forged psychiatric documentation. The courtroom stilled. This isn't a custody battle. It's a systemic assassination of a woman's credibility. She placed both reports on the evidence table, the forged and the original, and pointed to the forged signature. They couldn't beat her story, so they tried to rewrite her character. Gasps broke in the gallery. The judge requested a recess. We will now open a secondary investigation into Ms. Hayes and Mrs. Dykes's legal submissions. I sat quietly, heart pounding. They forged my mind to match their narrative, but truth leaves fingerprints too. Later, over lunch at a corner cafe downtown, I checked my phone. Another message. From Venora's number. Don't forget to delete yesterday's messages. She checks everything now. I froze. It was meant for Dawn, not me. I showed it to Honeychurch. She didn't blink. Forward it to the court, she said. I replied to the message with nothing but a screenshot of it. 2 minutes later. Message unsent. Too late, I murmured. The metadata confirmed it originated from Dawn's phone. The content was damning. Another supplemental filing sent to the court. Digital impersonation. Psychological manipulation. Confirmed. By late afternoon, we were back in the judge's chambers for a closed meeting. She didn't waste time. We've reviewed all new filings and evidence. There is clear indication of document fraud, digital tampering, and coercive psychological control over a minor. She looked at Elaine and Dawn. I'm placing a temporary restraining order against both of you, effective immediately. Elaine's mouth fell open. You can't. The judge raised a hand. Do not interrupt. Dawn tried to speak. Honeychurch cut in first. You've had your turn. The judge turned to me. Custody ruling will be finalized tomorrow morning. For now, the child will be placed in supervised care, pending full transfer. I nodded, breath caught in my chest. It wasn't over. But it had turned. Outside, the sky had shifted. Soft gray, low clouds. I walked toward the parking lot, keys in hand, mind spinning. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Tatiana, wait. I turned. Reet. He looked pale, lips pressed into a trembling line. I didn't know she went that far. His voice was small, hesitant. I studied his face, not confusion, not innocence, something worse, a knowing that had festered into silence. I stepped closer. You knew enough, I said, and you said nothing. His shoulders dropped. I turned and walked away. Silence isn't innocence. It's approval. I woke to silence. Not the kind that claws at your nerves, but the kind that holds. Gentle, still. My chest didn't feel heavy. My breath didn't catch. I sat up slowly and let the morning stay quiet. No TV, no news, no texts, just breath. The mug in my hand warmed my palms. I didn't rush to sip. I watched the light drift across the kitchen floor, soft like it belonged there. Like I did. I stared at my phone, but didn't touch it. Whatever news waited could wait a little longer. They don't tell you peace isn't loud. They don't tell you that sometimes peace begins the moment you stop being afraid of what you could lose. By midday, I returned to the estate, not alone this time. A court officer followed me through the gate, clipboard in hand. Elaine and Dawn weren't there. They weren't allowed within 500 feet. I'll just be upstairs gathering my daughter's things, I said. He nodded once, stayed in the foyer. Venora's room was still painted soft green. Her books still in the same order, but her bed looked untouched, like it had been staged for a listing. I gathered her favorite blanket, the owl nightlight, the sticker book we used to fill together. I left the rest. In the guest room, I paused. It was the same bed I slept in when they said I was too fragile to be near Venora. The same door they once locked from the outside. For my safety. The shame I once felt standing in that room now turned to something else. Clarity. Downstairs, the dining table was immaculate. Same chairs, same pattern. My seat still tucked closest to the kitchen door. Never the center, always the margin. In the hallway bin, I spotted a torn photo. I pulled it out. It was me. From the beach trip they'd posted about for months. They'd cropped me out for the family album, but here was the original, ripped down the center, as if my presence offended the narrative. I didn't react. I reached into my coat, pulled out a frame. Inside, a photo of me and Venora at the lake last spring, both laughing mid-splash, hair wet, cheeks flushed. I placed it on the mantel. Then I walked out without looking back. Reunification began the next week. Venora sat at the child psychologist's office in the middle of the couch, legs tucked under, hands folded too perfectly in her lap. I didn't speak. I just sat beside her. After the first 3 visits, she still hadn't said a word to me, but she didn't move away either. That was enough, for now. By the 4th session, she handed the psychologist a drawing. It was a house, and a woman holding a key. The fence was gone. I pressed my hand gently to the drawing, not saying anything. I didn't need her to call me mommy yet. I just needed her to feel safe enough to draw me back in. Back home in Chicago, I sat at my kitchen table, the courtroom photo now framed on my desk. The one where I stood, speaking without notes, telling the truth no one else would say. I opened my journal, wrote a letter, not to my parents, not to the system, to myself. You did not deserve exile. You survived it. You were not a failed daughter. You were a silenced one. We think family is blood, but the first family we build must be within ourselves. I folded the page carefully and tucked it in the back of the journal. The future was unwritten, but it was mine now. Elaine never apologized. Dawn didn't either. Reet moved in with a cousin on the other side of the county. I never asked which one. One day, I received a blank email. No subject, no message, from Elaine's old address. I deleted it. Closure isn't given, it's claimed. Sometimes closure is walking away without slamming the door. I boxed up the rest of the old family photos and brought them to the local historical archive. I labeled the envelope, "For truth, not tribute. Let the town remember what they want." I know what really happened. Venora and I were walking through the park 2 weeks later, hand in hand, the air crisp, leaves crackling underfoot. She looked up at me, tugged my sleeve. "Can we go home now?" I smiled, squeezing her hand. Because for the first time, home wasn't a place they built. It was where we were going together. The courtroom was packed. The air didn't move, like even the oxygen was waiting. No phones buzzed, no coughs, just tension so thick it coated your lungs. The judge entered slowly, her robe trailing behind like the final curtain before a show ends. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. In the matter of custody regarding minor Venora Dykes, every word felt carved in stone. Full and permanent custody is restored to Tatiana Dykes. The silence didn't last. Elaine gasped audibly. Dawn dropped her clutch. The judge continued, tone even, clipped. Based on documented psychological fraud, digital impersonation, and emotional endangerment, this court opens formal investigation into Mrs. Elaine Dykes and Mrs. Dawn Hayes for perjury and custodial abuse. The room erupted, a wave of murmurs. Fingers tapped on phones, heads turned to one another. She finished with one sentence that would haunt the transcripts. "What they tried to erase, you reclaimed with evidence and integrity." My hands didn't shake, my lips didn't move, but inside, a dam broke quietly. Justice wasn't loud. It was precise. 2 officers approached Dawn near the bench. She stood, eyes wide, blinking like a child waking from a nightmare. "You can't do this!" They didn't answer. As they escorted her down the aisle, she turned her head over her shoulder. "You ruined this family!" I stood, not fast, not angry, just steady. "No," I said clearly. "You built it on lies." Outside the courthouse, the media was already rolling. I faced them directly. The lights weren't blinding. They were illuminating. "This isn't about revenge," I said, eyes locked on the camera. "It's about protection, and I will protect my daughter, no matter whose ego it offends." That clip would be shared, reshared, stitched into montages of survivor stories. 1,000 women DM'd me that night. Thousands more whispered, "Me too," in private. That evening, Reet showed up at the community center. He stood across from me under the porch light, shoulders hunched, his jacket zipped too high. He looked smaller than he used to, smaller than the fear he allowed. "She won't speak," he said. "Elaine's just sitting there." I didn't offer comfort. I wasn't there for his reckoning. I didn't know she'd go that far. I didn't blink. But you knew she'd go. He reached into his pocket, hesitated. I don't know if there's a way back. There's not, I said flatly. I handed him an envelope. He opened it. A photo. Venora holding my hand beside the lake, scrawled on the back, "You didn't protect us, we did." He looked down, but I was already walking away. A week later, in the park near where it all began, I stood in front of a modest gathering. Honeychurch, Barbara, Miss Kelly, a few women from the support group. We'd built a small ceremonial fire pit in the clearing. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't loud. I brought a box. Inside, old family documents, manipulated photos, a printed copy of the forged psych report, the torn family tree, and last, folded neatly, was the paper I once signed temporarily giving up my rights. One by one, I dropped them in. The flames crackled, not just with heat, but with liberation. When only the last paper remained, I held it up. To all the women who've been called unstable instead of unheard. My voice didn't shake. This is for us. I let it fall. Honeychurch squeezed my shoulder. A hush fell as smoke rose. The past burned. Not in anger, in choice. Venora and I moved into our apartment in Chicago that same week. It wasn't grand. It wasn't a mansion. But it had light. And it had space. Space we could choose what to fill with. Together, we hung up her new painting. Two hands reaching across a broken fence, finally touching. "Do I have to call anyone else Mommy again?" she asked quietly. I smiled. "Only if you want to," she smiled back. "I don't." I sat down on the couch, watching her skip from room to room, her footsteps echoing like freedom. Narration settled into me. We didn't move into a mansion. We moved into truth. And that was enough. The last scene? I sat on the balcony, tea in hand. The wind danced gently across my face. Venora ran past inside, her laughter bouncing off the walls. Loud, free, present. I closed my eyes and whispered, to no one in particular. They taught me silence. I sipped once. I answered with thunder. Pause. And now, peace.